Alright, hello people of the internet. The video I just did for ticket number 2, dealing with the port channels, is actually still rendering as I make this networking short here. So I'm just calling this real world short. It's just kind of rambling on about some networking things I've run into recently, some things that'll hopefully kind of give you some insight as to the day-to-day network administrator, network engineer tasks. So I'm going to cover kind of three main topics briefly in this one, and just look forward to, this might be once a week or a couple times a week, just depending on what I run into, or different things I think might help people out who are looking to get into the networking field. So the first one deals with Cisco Call Manager. That's Cisco's solution for voice over IP technology. A lot of you have probably seen the Cisco IP phones before, and they ride over your network, and there's a lot to them, but the actual server itself that they tie back into is well, that's what we're getting to, is Cisco Call Manager. There's also a Call Manager Express, which runs on the iOS itself, so you can put that on a router. This is the full-blown server here. It's kind of a I believe Red Hat Linux derived operating system that you install to a server or a virtual machine. So there's a lot to it. There's the phones themselves, and that's just such a small aspect as far as configuring, you know, lines on a phone and giving it the title that the people see. What you deal with for the phones and the end users is really simple. It's mundane, but it's really simple. There's more to Call Manager as far as route patterns, hunt groups, conference bridges, media termination points, the meet me numbers, all that. I'm looking to do some video series on the Call Manager as it comes down, as we keep moving forward, because I've fallen into kind of a VoIP engineer role at my job now. So I'm starting to gather quite a bit of knowledge on this field, and I'd like to provide some of that to anyone who's looking to get into networking, because depending on the job you end up at, you may be in a position where you're in charge of just firewalls, or a lot of the smaller organizations, you're going to be in a role where you manage the firewalls, the routers and switches, the VoIP, you know, Call Manager, or maybe a PBX like Avaya or Mitel, or hopefully something open source like Trixbox, or, you know, asterisk based Linux OS. But for some reason, a lot of companies like to go commercial, I guess, because the support's there, and it's a solid operating system, or solid VoIP handling. But the thing I want to talk to you about, though, in this short one relating to Call Manager, is the partitions and calling search spaces. So they're in call routing classic control. You've got partition and calling search space. I don't have them set up on this lab Call Manager, which is on demo licensing. I could set them up on here, but I just don't have a large enough test lab to have a need for them. But so how these work essentially is, you have partitions and you have calling search spaces. And I should have connected my my writing tablet and drew this out for you. But if an extension, for example, a real basic example, if an extension goes into a partition, by default there's a none partition and a none calling search space, and they can access each other. You can think of a partition as a way of breaking off and segmenting different things, and it doesn't have to be just a phone. But for the example, say an extension is, say extension 1000 is in partition B. Anyone that's not in a calling search space that has that partition in it are not going to be able to access that. So when you're creating them on the server, hopefully there's not too much to configure here in the actual calling search space, because I'm trying to make this short. But partition B, let's just make one. You can make a lot of partitions all at once, and if you do in Call Manager, you have to do a find typically to show results for whatever you're looking at. So there's partition B, and then if I go back to class control and go to calling search space, let me make a calling search space really quick. Let's go part B, CSS. Alright, so here's where you put the route partitions into that calling search space. So if you don't add partition B into that calling search space, it cannot reach anything in partition B. So for the example of the phone extension, if another user is not in the calling search space that has partition B in it, they're not going to be able to call that phone. It's going to error out. So this goes across everything. Partitions and calling search spaces are used everywhere. When you're talking about route patterns, you can do different partitions for route patterns. So maybe a certain set of users can call something a certain way and certain other users can't. The opportunities for partitions and calling search spaces are endless. Now, it seems like a relatively simple concept. What's in a calling search space that has that partition in it can reach that partition. If the partition is not in that calling search space, it cannot. And it is a pretty simple concept, except that it applies to everything. So you have to make sure you know where you're applying different things and what should be able to reach each other, and etc. When it comes down to probably the most granular is when you're dealing with the route patterns, the dial patterns, and the gateways and whatnot. So pretty straightforward. However, Cisco has the ability to do bulk updates on things. So you can bulk update the phones, for example, to sorry, I'm talking and trying to find here, to change their partition or their calling search space, or both. So if you go to you select really what you want to update, but say you select them all, you would do a custom query, and then whatever you found in your results, you hit next to select those. You can update the calling search space, for example, right here, and change it to whatever you want. And then you can reset the phones after you do this. You can schedule these batch updates. They call it the bulk administration tool, the BAT tool in Cisco. BAT tool, I guess, is redundant because the T stands for tool. But when you do this, you have to make sure that anything else they're tied to gets updated also. So you schedule this and you run it. All of a sudden they can't access their voicemail. Well, now in voicemail, you're going to have what's called the voicemail pilot. That's like an extension they go to that then puts them to voicemail ports. And you're going to have a bunch of voicemail ports depending on what you have licenses for. That pilot needs to have a calling search space that's capable of reaching those ports. And those ports might be extensions that you accidentally update the partition on, and now nobody can call. So when you're doing an update on a calling search space and partition, make sure you hit every possible device that could need a calling search space and partition and get them all updated to what's going to be correct for them to work properly. The reason I say that is the real world example I have is we pushed an upgrade to partitions and calling search spaces and attempted to hit every single aspect we could, and that exact instance I just gave you was similar to the problem that we had in that we had an auto attendant. So in Unity, which is Cisco's voicemail application, they have these features called auto attendants, where you get kind of an operator that tells you your options, and you can set what users can do if they push a certain number. It'll take them to maybe a different recording or somebody's extension and things like that. So the auto attendant itself did not have. In order to get over to the auto attendant, you have to create a route point, and typically is how you're going to do it, and then forward it that route point's calls to voicemail, and then Unity takes over from there, and then you have an auto attendant set for that number. Well, the route point, I don't have any made, but anyway, along the line we had a calling search space that wasn't set correctly, and so calls were getting dropped, and it was happening in real world, and it was essentially an outage. So just keep that in mind when you're working with Call Manager and partitions and calling search spaces, is that you don't just update the phones themselves, update everything that it applies to. Topic number 2 would be for planned outages, kind of relating to this one, the scheduled Call Manager stuff. When you're doing planned updates, a lot of times what you're going to do is, for example, an iOS upgrade. What you're going to do is you're going to copy a new iOS file to the device. Let me move this over. And then you're going to maybe multiple devices, and then you're going to schedule a reload, essentially, to load the new iOS image, the bin file. So when you do that reload, it will pull the new file and everything will work great. However, we had a bunch of iOS files waiting on devices, and we had a scheduled outage for that evening. Well, we also had an improved outage to take down a router to swap out a fan. So we take the router down, open it up, swap out the fan, everything goes great. Screw it back together, re-rack it, hook it up. It comes up, and all of a sudden, it was actually a voice gateway. We can't make calls. And so we started troubleshooting the Call Manager itself, seeing if we had done anything. So we started looking at all these different things. Well, we did a side-by-side of the configs on that router because we have some management software. And when we saw the new config and the old config, we noticed immediately there was a version difference in the iOS. So it turns out when we brought it back online, it loaded the new iOS file that it had stored. And there was some sort of a bug that was not allowing calls to function as we had prior, because there's small configuration changes. I think it was going from like 12 to 15. So there's definitely some changes that took place on the iOS. So just keep in mind to communicate with your team. That was really on us that took it down, to not remember that it had a new iOS waiting to come back up. But we found it relatively quick, so it wasn't a big issue. It still caused an outage though. People still knew about it, so just you want to try and avoid that as much as possible. I guess to mitigate that, we could have taken the router down after hours for the fan upgrade. Then it wouldn't have been a kind of midday outage like it was. So that's what we learned from that one. Let's see. Furthermore, relating to iOS upgrades, the last thing I'll cover, I guess, in this short video is that when you do upgrades like that, if you have switches that are stacked, and if you're not familiar with that, it's the kind of silver cable, goes into those small ports on the back of the switches if your switch has them, talking Cisco equipment. Stacking allows you to access kind of one switch, and really it's multiple switches, but they're treated as one switch, so you see all the ports as if they're connected to one device, and the running config is kind of pushed across all devices, so they're all synced up. The upgrade went relatively smoothly. However, one switch in the stack did not take the upgrade. So let me show you real quick what it looks like to, where'd that go? What it looks like to show. The command that I used was show switch detail, and what that does is show you all the members in the switch stack, and one of them is elected as the master and the other ones are members. And you can cable these up. If you Google Cisco StackWise, you can see kind of how those cables work. So you can see in this example I found online, random Google image search, looks like it's a Cisco page though. You can see these two are down, okay, and it shows none. Typically what you're going to see is you'll show what, for example, switch 1, which you can see switch 1's the master. Switch 1 has port 2 connected to switch 2. So you go down to switch 2 and you say, okay, switch 2 has port 1 connected to switch 1. So that's how those are connected. And then the same thing here. This goes to switch 3. This is typically how you want to wire them. 2 to 1, 2 to 1, 2 to 1. And when you get to the last switch you want in the stack, I don't remember how many you can support. You go from its 2 then back up to switch 1's 1, and that kind of closes the circle there. It doesn't have to be like that. I've seen them function on limited connections. But getting back on topic, what I did see when I did this command was instead of ready for one of these switches, it showed version mismatch. And so that switch was in the stack, but it wasn't functioning properly, and so it was showing down. Physically, what I saw on the switch is none of the port link lights lit up. So if I were to watch it when it booted, it probably mentions in there something, but I was remote from the location, so I wasn't able to watch that. But what I did was, typically you have your iOS files stored on the device, and what you can do is say like a show flash, for example, or a dir flash. I'm not sure how it works in, yeah, so GNS3 complains about some sort of image being booted from the device. It must be the way they boot these, but anyway, usually you'll have a bin file located in there, .bin, and it's going to be a Cisco iOS file, looking something along the lines of this, depending on which version you have. But let me get back in here. No, that's not it. But what I saw when you have stacked switches, if you do a show flash and question mark, the stacked switches have flash 1, flash 2. So you can, from the one device that you're managing, you can see all the switches, kind of internal memory. So in the one flash, I saw an older version of the iOS operating system. So I copied it from flash 1 to flash 2. And I had to delete it off from the other flash because there wasn't enough space. I had to delete off the old one, which you can do for an upgrade. You can actually delete an iOS file, bin file, and then load a new one in there, and then reload it, and it'll load the new one. You just want to make sure that you don't reload while you don't have a bin file on the device, or else it's bad news bears trying to get you back up and running. You'll probably come right up into ROM on mode, not boot into iOS. So by copying that over, I reloaded the whole stack, and then they came up, and there was no longer a version mismatch when I did a show switch detail like this output here. So that kind of just shows you how stacking works to an extent, and that also just keep in mind when you're doing iOS upgrades, make sure it goes through smoothly. So this was after hours. There was not really an outage, but it was just something we had to work to repair. So those are the 3 topics I have for this networking short. Hopefully you found any of this useful, and thanks for watching.